The waves crashed against the shore with rhythmic persistence, each one dissolving into foam before retreating back to the vast blue expanse. Eliza Morgan stood on her balcony, eyes closed, feeling the vibrations of the ocean through the wooden railing beneath her fingertips. At 42, she had learned to experience the world differently than most, through touch, through sight, through the subtle shifts in air pressure against her skin. She didn't hear her husband Daniel approach. She never did. Not since the progressive hearing loss had claimed the last of her natural hearing 7 years ago. But she felt the boards shift slightly beneath her feet, sensed his presence before he gently touched her shoulder. Eliza turned, smiling at the man she'd been married to for 15 years. His dark hair was graying at the temples now, but his eyes were still the same deep blue that had captivated her when they first met. She read his lips as he spoke. "Beautiful evening," he said, gesturing toward the sunset painting the horizon in strokes of orange and crimson. Eliza nodded, reaching up to adjust her hearing aid, the device that connected her, however imperfectly, to the world of sound. With it, she could make out some sounds, particularly when combined with reading lips. Without it, she lived in near-complete silence. "I think I'm going to head inside," Daniel said, his lips forming the words carefully, a habit he'd developed over the years for her benefit. "Getting a bit chilly." She nodded again, turning back to the ocean. Sometimes she preferred the silence, the solitude. It gave her space to think, to feel. As a photographer specializing in nature and landscapes, she'd learned to see the world with heightened visual acuity, finding beauty in details others might miss. Daniel's hand touched her cheek gently, turning her face toward his. "I love you," he said, and then, unexpectedly, reached up and removed her hearing aid. Confusion flickered across Eliza's face. This was unusual. Daniel knew how much she hated having the device removed without warning. It was one of their unspoken boundaries. But before she could question him, he pressed a kiss to her forehead and stepped back inside through the sliding glass door. Eliza frowned, watching as he walked through their vacation rental living room, her hearing aid still in his hand. Curious and slightly annoyed, she followed, stopping just inside the doorway. That's when she saw her, Melissa Evans, their neighbor from back home. The woman whose husband had left her just 6 months ago. The woman who had been stopping by their house with increasing frequency, always when Daniel was home. Always with some flimsy excuse about needing help with something. Melissa was sitting on their couch, looking remarkably comfortable for someone who wasn't supposed to be here. Here, at their private beachfront getaway that Daniel had insisted they needed. Just the two of them. Daniel crossed the room to Melissa, Eliza's hearing aid still clutched in his palm. His back was to Eliza now, blocking her view of his face, making it impossible to read his lips. But Eliza could see Melissa's face perfectly. She watched as the woman's expression shifted from casual to something more intimate, her eyes lighting up, her head tilting slightly as Daniel spoke to her. Words Eliza couldn't hear. Words Daniel had deliberately ensured she wouldn't hear by taking away her connection to sound. Melissa stood up, nodding enthusiastically, a brilliant smile spreading across her face. She reached out and squeezed Daniel's arm, a touch that lingered too long to be merely friendly. Then, to Eliza's horror, Melissa glanced over Daniel's shoulder and met her eyes. There was no surprise there, no embarrassment at being caught. Instead, there was something like pity mixed with triumph. In that moment, as the last rays of sunset filtered through the beach house windows, casting long shadows across the wooden floor, Eliza understood. Daniel hadn't taken her hearing aid to be cruel. He'd taken it because he thought she couldn't see them, because he thought if she couldn't hear, she wouldn't know. He had no idea that Eliza had become fluent in a language beyond words, the language of expressions, of body language, of the unspoken truths that people revealed when they thought no one was paying attention. And in that language, everything was crystal clear. 3 months earlier, the diagnosis hadn't been a surprise. Eliza had known something was wrong for weeks. The muffled sounds, the ringing that wouldn't stop, the way voices seemed to fade in and out like a badly tuned radio. Still, hearing Dr. Patel say the words had made it real in a way her suspicions hadn't. "The hearing loss is progressing faster than we anticipated," she'd explained, her face kind but serious. "The new aids will help, but I want to be honest with you. This isn't something we can reverse." Daniel had squeezed her hand then, a gesture of solidarity that had meant everything to Eliza. They'd been through this journey, together from the beginning, from the first subtle signs of hearing, loss in her early 30s to the more dramatic decline. "After a viral infection 5 years ago, we'll manage," he'd said later that evening as they sat in their kitchen, the soft glow of the overhead pendant lights creating a warm bubble around them. "We always do," Eliza had nodded, throat tight with emotion. "It's just, I'm tired of adapting, of compensating. I'm tired of reading between the lines of conversations, of feeling like I'm always one step behind." Daniel had reached across the table, his fingertips brushing hers. "I know, but did he? Could he really understand what it was like to live in her increasingly silent world? To catch snippets of sound that never quite formed a complete picture? To rely on visual cues, on context, on the patterns of human behavior to fill in the gaps?" She'd pushed the thought away, ashamed of her momentary resentment. Daniel had been her rock through all of this. He'd learned basic sign language alongside her, though they rarely used it. He'd become adept at positioning himself where she could see his lips when they spoke. He'd been patient when she asked him to repeat things, or when she missed social cues at parties. "I've been thinking," she'd said, changing the subject, "maybe we should take that beach trip we've been talking about." "Before the summer's over?" Daniel's face had brightened. "The rental at Crescent Bay? The one with the amazing sunset views? That's the one. I could use some new landscapes to photograph. And we could use some time away. Just the two of us." He'd hesitated for just a fraction of a second, so brief that anyone else might have missed it. But Eliza, who had learned to read the micro-expressions that often revealed more than words, had noticed. "Is there a problem?" she'd asked. No problem," Daniel had replied quickly. "It's just work is crazy right now with the new client accounts. Let me check my schedule and see when I can get away." It had taken him 3 days to confirm he could take time off, unusual for Daniel, who typically made decisions quickly and decisively. But Eliza had pushed aside her mild concern, telling herself she was being oversensitive, that her growing isolation was making her paranoid. 2 weeks later, as she was sorting through their mail, she'd found a flyer for a photography exhibition in Boston. Normally, she would have been excited. Photography exhibitions were her passion, both professionally and personally, but this particular flyer had come addressed to Daniel, not to her. Even more curious, when she'd mentioned it to him, his reaction had been oddly dismissive. "Oh, that? Just something a client mentioned. Probably not worth the trip." Eliza had nodded and let it go. But later, when she'd looked up the exhibition online, she'd discovered it featured coastal landscapes. Exactly the kind of work she specialized in. The kind of work Daniel usually made a point of showing her. The small inconsistencies had continued to pile up. Daniel working later than usual. Text messages he would read and then quickly put his phone away. A new cologne she didn't remember him buying. Weekend errands that seemed to take longer than they should. None of it definitive. None of it damning. Just enough to plant a seed of doubt that Eliza couldn't quite shake. Then came Melissa Evans. Their neighbor had moved in 2 years ago following her divorce. Attractive in a carefully maintained way, with highlighted blonde hair and a penchant for yoga pants that showcased her toned physique, Melissa had always been friendly but distant, until her husband left her 6 months ago. Suddenly, Melissa was everywhere, stopping by to borrow tools Daniel never got back, bringing over baked goods she'd made too much of, asking for help with her Wi-Fi, her garbage disposal, her ceiling fan, and Daniel, who had always been kind but reserved with their neighbors, had become Melissa's personal handyman. "She's going through a tough time," he'd explained when Eliza had finally commented on it. "And it's not like it's a big deal to help out." Eliza had agreed, feeling petty for even bringing it up. After all, she'd been the one who always emphasized being good neighbors, creating community, But then she'd come home early one day from a meeting with a gallery owner to find Melissa in their kitchen, laughing at something Daniel had said. They hadn't seen her at first, and in that unguarded moment, Eliza had witnessed something that made her stomach tighten. The way Melissa leaned toward Daniel, the way her fingers casually brushed his arm, the way her eyes lingered on his face. It was nothing explicit. Nothing she could point to and definitively say was wrong. Just a feeling, a sense that something had shifted. When they'd noticed her, both had acted perfectly normal. Daniel had mentioned that Melissa had stopped by to return a book he'd lent her. A photography book, as it happened, one of Eliza's favorites. That night, for the first time, Eliza had lain awake wondering if her marriage was in trouble. The beach trip had been her attempt to reconnect, to re-establish the intimacy that seemed to be slipping away. Daniel had finally agreed to a week at Crescent Bay, a small upscale beach community known for its pristine shoreline and relative seclusion. The first 2 days had been perfect. They'd walked on the beach, cooked seafood in the well-appointed kitchen of their rental, opened a bottle of wine, and watched the sunset from the balcony. Daniel had been attentive, present in a way he hadn't been for months. Eliza had begun to believe she'd imagined the distance between them, that her fears were just manifestations of her own insecurities about her hearing loss. Then, on the third day, Daniel had received a call that took him out to the balcony for privacy, something that hadn't been their practice before. His expression had been carefully neutral when he'd returned, but there had been a new energy about him, a barely contained excitement. "Everything okay?" she'd asked. "Just work," he'd replied, not quite meeting her eyes. That evening, he'd suggested they have dinner at one of the local restaurants, a departure from their plan to cook at the rental. The restaurant had been noisy, making it difficult for Eliza to follow conversations even with her hearing aid. She'd found herself nodding and smiling at appropriate intervals, pretending to understand more than she did, a coping mechanism she'd developed over years of progressive hearing loss. When they'd returned to the rental, Daniel had seemed distracted, checking his phone more frequently than usual. "Are you sure everything's all right?" Eliza had asked again. "Just tired," he'd said, yawning for effect. "Think I'll turn in early." The next morning, their fourth day at the beach, Daniel had announced he needed to run into town for some supplies. He'd been gone for nearly 3 hours. When Eliza had asked what had taken so long, he'd gestured vaguely to the few grocery bags on the counter. "You know how it is in tourist towns. Everything takes forever." She'd nodded, accepting the explanation even as a part of her noted it didn't quite add up. The grocery store was 15 minutes away. Even with lines, it shouldn't have taken 3 hours. That afternoon, she'd decided to upload some of her beach photos to her laptop. As she'd scrolled through the images, she'd noticed something odd in one of the pictures she'd taken of the beach from their balcony the previous day. A familiar figure walking along the shoreline. Zooming in, her suspicions had been confirmed. Melissa Evans. The same Melissa who should have been back in their hometown, nearly 500 miles away. The same Melissa who had no apparent reason to be at this particular beach resort during the exact same week they were there. It had been too much of a coincidence to ignore. And now, as Eliza stood frozen in the doorway of their beach rental, watching Melissa's face light up at whatever Daniel had just said to her, all the pieces clicked into place with devastating clarity. Turning Point Eliza remained motionless, her breath caught in her throat. Time seemed to stretch and warp around her as she processed what she was seeing. Daniel, her husband, her partner, the man who had promised to stand by her in sickness and in health, standing with his back to her, still holding her hearing aid like some kind of trophy. And Melissa, looking past him directly at Eliza with an expression that could only be described as victorious. In that moment, Eliza made a decision. She would not confront them, not yet. She needed to know exactly what was happening, needed to understand the full extent of the betrayal before she acted. Silently, she stepped backward onto the balcony, sliding the glass door closed. Through the glass, she could see that neither Daniel nor Melissa had noticed her retreat. They were too absorbed in each other. Eliza moved to the corner of the balcony where she could observe them through the window without being easily seen. Her photographer's eye automatically noted the composition of the scene, the way the fading light cast long shadows across the room, the intimate body language between the two figures, the small but significant space between them that could disappear at any moment. Inside, Daniel turned slightly, giving Eliza a partial view of his profile. She couldn't make out his words, but she could read the excitement in his posture, the animation in his gestures. He placed her hearing aid on the coffee table, casually, as if it were a set of keys or a remote control, rather than her vital connection to the world of sound. Melissa nodded enthusiastically at whatever Daniel was saying. She glanced at her watch, then said something that made Daniel laugh, a full-bodied laugh that Eliza could almost feel through the glass. She hadn't seen him laugh like that in months. Daniel moved to the kitchenette area, opening a bottle of wine, the special vintage they'd brought specifically for their anniversary dinner tomorrow night. He poured 2 glasses, handed one to Melissa, and they clinked them together in a toast. The intimacy of the gesture sent a wave of nausea through Eliza. This wasn't just a casual flirtation or a momentary lapse in judgment. This was deliberate, planned. The realization hit her with physical force, making her legs weak. She watched as Daniel checked his phone, showed something on the screen to Melissa, who nodded approvingly. Then, to Eliza's shock, Daniel picked up his wallet and keys from the counter. They were leaving. Eliza pressed herself further into the shadows as Daniel and Melissa moved toward the front door. Through the glass, she could see them talking, smiling, touching casually, little brushes of hands against arms, shoulders bumping. The easy familiarity between them spoke volumes. Just before they reached the door, Daniel paused. He said something to Melissa, who laughed and nodded, then headed outside alone. Daniel turned and walked back into the living room, his gaze sweeping across the space as if looking for something, or someone. Eliza held her breath, flattening herself against the wall of the balcony. Daniel's eyes passed over the glass doors to the balcony, but in the growing dusk, he didn't see her in the shadows. After a moment, he shrugged, picked up her hearing aid from the coffee table, and walked toward their bedroom. Eliza watched through the window as he entered the room they shared and placed her hearing aid on her nightstand, arranging it carefully beside her book as if she'd left it there herself. The calculated nature of the act made her blood run cold. He was covering his tracks, creating a narrative where she had simply decided to rest without her hearing aid, something she occasionally did when her ears needed a break from the device. Daniel returned to the living room, gave one more cursory glance around, then left through the front door, pulling it firmly shut behind him. Eliza remained frozen in place for several minutes, ensuring they were truly gone before she finally moved. Her limbs felt heavy, disconnected from her body as she slid open the balcony door and stepped back inside. The silence that enveloped her was no longer comforting. Now it felt oppressive, isolating, a reminder of the vulnerability Daniel had exploited. She walked to the coffee table where he had carelessly placed her hearing aid before moving it to the bedroom. A half-empty wine glass sat there, Melissa's. Eliza picked it up, studying the perfect imprint of berry-colored lipstick on the rim. Setting the glass down, she moved to the bedroom. Her hearing aid was exactly where Daniel had placed it, innocently sitting on the nightstand as if she'd put it there herself. She picked it up, turning it over in her hands, feeling a sudden, irrational urge to throw it against the wall. Instead, she placed it carefully in her ear, adjusting it until the muffled sounds of the beach house came into focus. The hum of the refrigerator, the distant crash of waves, the ticking of the wall clock counting down the seconds of her marriage. Eliza moved methodically through the house, looking for clues, for evidence, for anything that might tell her where they had gone or what they were planning. In the kitchen, she found Daniel's laptop open on the counter. It was locked, but the browser was open to his email account. He must have forgotten to close it in his haste. Her finger hovered over the trackpad, a moral boundary about to be crossed. They had never snooped in each other's personal accounts before. Privacy and trust had been foundational to their relationship, or so she had believed. With a deep breath, Eliza clicked on the inbox. Most of the emails were mundane: work correspondences, newsletters, shopping confirmations. But there, near the top, was an email from Melissa sent just yesterday. The subject line read simply, "Tomorrow." Eliza clicked it open. Everything's set for tomorrow. I've booked the dinner reservation for 7:30 at the Lighthouse. They have that private terrace you mentioned wanting. The hotel confirmation came through too. Ocean view, king bed, champagne waiting. You romantic, you. I still can't believe we're doing this. Feels like we've been waiting forever. Just one more day and then no more sneaking around. No more pretending. How are you going to handle things with E? Are you still planning to tell her after you get back? See you tomorrow. Counting the minutes. MPS. Don't forget to bring the blue folder with the papers. We can go over everything at dinner. Eliza stared at the screen, her mind struggling to process what she was reading. Not just an affair, a planned escape. A dinner reservation. A hotel room. Papers in a blue folder. Divorce papers? It had to be. The calculated betrayal was staggering. Daniel had brought her to this beautiful place, this romantic setting, only to slip away to be with Melissa. To plan their future together while pretending to rebuild his marriage with Eliza, and he'd used her disability to do it. Had removed her hearing aid so he could speak freely to Melissa, assuming that without sound, Eliza was effectively blind to his deception. That was what hurt the most. Not just the betrayal, but the exploitation of her vulnerability. The use of her hearing loss as a tool in his affair. Eliza closed the laptop, her decision made. She wouldn't confront Daniel when he returned. She wouldn't cry or scream or beg for explanations. No, she would do something far more powerful. She would see, she would listen, and then she would act. Moving with renewed purpose, Eliza went to her camera bag and pulled out her professional camera with the telephoto lens. If Daniel and Melissa thought they could conduct their affair in plain sight, they were about to discover just how observant a photographer with progressive hearing loss could be. The Lighthouse restaurant sat perched on a cliff overlooking the ocean, its whitewashed exterior glowing in the carefully positioned landscape lighting. Through her camera's viewfinder, Eliza could see the private terrace Daniel had requested, a secluded space with just 4 tables, separated from the main dining area by a low wall adorned with climbing roses. She had positioned herself on a public viewing platform about 100 yards away, her professional camera with its powerful zoom lens giving her a perfect vantage point. To any passerby, she looked like a dedicated photographer capturing the sunset over the picturesque restaurant. No one would suspect she was documenting her husband's betrayal. Through the lens, she watched as Daniel and Melissa were escorted to their table. Daniel pulled out Melissa's chair, a courtly gesture he had once reserved for Eliza. They sat close, their heads bent toward each other in intimate conversation. Eliza adjusted her focus, zooming in on their hands as Daniel reached across the table to grasp Melissa's fingers. On the table between them sat a blue folder, the one mentioned in the email. She took photo after photo, her finger automatically pressing the shutter button at key moments. Daniel presenting Melissa with a small jewelry box. Melissa's delighted expression as she opened it. The flash of something gold, a necklace perhaps or a bracelet, as Daniel fastened it around her wrist. The blue folder being opened, documents being reviewed, signatures being added. Each image was a knife to her heart, but Eliza continued, her photographer's discipline overriding her personal pain. She needed evidence, needed proof, needed to understand exactly what she was facing before she confronted them. As the evening progressed, she watched them share dessert from the same plate, drink champagne, and finally leave the restaurant hand in hand. They walked to Daniel's car, the same car he and Eliza had driven to the beach, and drove away in the direction of what Eliza assumed was the hotel mentioned in Melissa's email. She could have followed them, could have burst into their romantic hideaway and created a scene, but that wasn't Eliza's style. She had always been methodical, thoughtful, strategic, And right now, she needed more information before she made her next move. Returning to the beach house, Eliza uploaded the photos to her laptop, studying them with clinical detachment. The blue folder had been opened just enough in several shots for her to make out the letterhead of Hudson and Mercer, a law firm in their hometown that specialized in family law, divorce papers. It had to be. The jewelry Daniel had given Melissa appeared to be a gold charm bracelet. Zooming in on one particular shot, Eliza could make out a small camera charm dangling from it, a photographer's camera, nearly identical to her own professional model. The symbolism wasn't lost on her. Daniel was literally giving pieces of their life together to Melissa. Eliza's hands trembled as she closed the laptop. She stood up, moving to the sliding glass doors that led to the balcony. The night was clear, the moon casting a silver path across the dark water. Under different circumstances, it would have been a scene she'd want to capture. The interplay of light and shadow, the vastness of the ocean against the velvet sky. Instead, she found herself wondering how many nights Daniel and Melissa had spent together while she was working late in her darkroom or traveling for photography assignments. How long this betrayal had been unfolding while she battled her progressive hearing loss, fighting to maintain her career and her independence. The sound of a key in the lock broke through her thoughts. Daniel was back. Eliza quickly moved to the bedroom, grabbing her hearing aid from the nightstand where she'd left it after returning from the lighthouse. She inserted it just as Daniel stepped into the beach house, closing the door quietly behind him. Taking a deep breath, Eliza stepped into the living room. Daniel startled visibly when he saw her standing there. "Eliza, I thought you'd be asleep." His eyes darted around the room, likely checking for signs that his earlier visitor had been discovered. "No," Eliza said calmly. "I've been awake, thinking." Daniel nodded, his expression carefully neutral. "Where's your hearing aid? Did you take it off to rest?" The calculated innocence of the question made something harden inside Eliza. "I'm wearing it now," she said, gesturing to her ear. "I found it on the nightstand. Funny, I don't remember leaving it there." A flash of uncertainty crossed Daniel's face, quickly masked. "You must have taken it off for a break. You do that sometimes when your ear gets sore, do I?" Eliza moved closer to him, studying his face with the same careful attention she'd give to a subject she was photographing. "That's not how I remember it." Daniel shifted uncomfortably under her gaze. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Eliza said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her, "that I remember you taking my hearing aid this afternoon. Right before you spoke to Melissa in our living room." The color drained from Daniel's face. "Eliza, I don't." She held up a hand, silencing him. "Don't insult me with lies. I saw you, Daniel. I saw you take my hearing aid. I saw Melissa sitting on our couch. I saw the way you two looked at each other." Daniel swallowed hard, his composure cracking. "It's not what you think." "No?" Eliza walked to her laptop, which sat closed on the coffee table. "It's not a months-long affair? It's not secret meetings and private dinners? It's not booking hotel rooms with ocean views and king-sized beds? It's not divorce papers from Hudson and Mercer?" With each question, Daniel's eyes widened further. How did I know?" Eliza opened the laptop, turning it to face him. On the screen was one of the photos she'd taken that evening. Daniel and Melissa at the lighthouse, the blue folder open between them, their heads bent together in conspiracy. "I'm a photographer, Daniel. I observe. I document. I see what others miss." Daniel stared at the image, then at Eliza, his expression a mixture of shock and shame. "You followed us?" "I didn't need to follow you. Melissa's email told me exactly where you'd be." His face paled further. "You went through my emails? And you took advantage of my disability to conduct your affair right under my nose," Eliza countered, her voice finally betraying a hint of the anger she felt. "Which one of us crossed the bigger line, Daniel?" He had no answer for that. Instead, he sank onto the couch, running a hand through his hair, a gesture Eliza had once found endearing. Now it just seemed theatrical, practiced. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," he finally said, his voice small. "Yet you planned it meticulously," Eliza replied. "The separate hotel room, the private terrace, The legal documents? The charm bracelet with the camera pendant. A nice touch, by the way. Very symbolic. Daniel's head snapped up at that last detail. Jesus, Eliza, how close were you watching? Close enough to see everything. Which is ironic, isn't it? You took my hearing aid because you thought if I couldn't hear you, I couldn't see you either, as if my disability makes me oblivious. As if being deaf means being blind to betrayal. The words hung between them, heavy with accusation. That's not fair, Daniel said, a defensive edge creeping into his voice. I've stood by you through all of this, through every doctor's appointment, every new hearing aid, every adjustment as things got worse. I learned sign language. I changed how I communicate. Congratulations on doing the bare minimum expected in a marriage, Eliza cut in, her voice icy. Would you like a medal for upholding your vows until they became inconvenient? Daniel flinched. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like, Daniel? Explain it to me. Help me understand how my husband of 15 years ends up in a restaurant with another woman, signing what I can only assume are divorce papers, on the night before our anniversary. The timing of it hit her anew as she said the words. Tomorrow was supposed to be their celebration, 16 years together. Instead, it had become the deadline for Daniel's escape. Daniel was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was resigned. I was going to tell you after we got back home. I didn't want to ruin the trip. A harsh laugh escaped Eliza. How considerate of you. And I suppose taking my hearing aid this afternoon, that was just to protect my feelings too. He had the decency to look ashamed. That was wrong. I know that. Melissa showed up unexpectedly. She wasn't supposed to come until tomorrow, but she got here early and texted me while you were in the shower. I panicked. So removing my ability to hear was your solution? I thought you were going to rest in the bedroom. I didn't know you'd come out to the balcony. I was going to put it back before you noticed. And that makes it better? Eliza shook her head in disbelief. Do you have any idea what it feels like to have the person you trust most use your disability against you? Daniel couldn't hold her gaze. I'm sorry, he said to the floor. I never meant to hurt you. And yet you planned this entire charade with surgical precision, Eliza observed. The beach trip that was supposedly for us, but conveniently coincided with your rendezvous with Melissa. The dinner reservation on the night before our anniversary, the hotel room you couldn't wait to get to tonight. Daniel's head snapped up. Nothing happened tonight. We just talked. Oh, I'm sure, Eliza said, not bothering to hide her skepticism. Just like I'm sure nothing happened all those times Melissa stopped by our house for help, with various household emergencies. It wasn't physical until recently, Daniel admitted, as if that somehow mitigated his betrayal. We connected emotionally first. After her divorce. Spare me the details of your affair's origin story, Eliza interrupted. I don't need to know when or how you fell in love with our neighbor. What I need to know is why you couldn't be honest with me. Why you had to resort to this. She gestured to the laptop screen, where the evidence of his deception was displayed in high resolution. This elaborate deception. Daniel was quiet for a moment, seemingly gathering his thoughts. When he spoke, his voice was subdued but steady. I tried, Eliza. I tried to talk to you so many times about how things were changing between us. About how your focus has been solely on your photography and your hearing loss for years now. About how I felt more like your caretaker than your partner. The accusation landed like a physical blow. My caretaker? Is that what you think you've been? Sometimes yes, Daniel admitted. And I was okay with that for a while. I understood that you were dealing with a lot, but then it never ended. Your career always came first. Your condition always demanded attention. And somewhere along the way, I just disappeared. So this is my fault? Eliza's voice rose in disbelief. I'm losing my hearing, fighting to keep my career alive, and that justifies you having an affair? No, that's not what I'm saying. Daniel stood up, pacing the small living room. What I'm saying is that marriages need nurturing from both sides. And for years now, you've been so wrapped up in your own struggles that there hasn't been room for mine. What struggles, Daniel? Your job is stable. Your health is perfect. What exactly have you been struggling with that I've so callously ignored? Loneliness, Eliza. The words exploded from him with unexpected force. I've been struggling with loneliness, with feeling invisible in my own marriage, with watching my wife retreat further and further into her silent world, while I stand on the outside, trying desperately to break through. The raw emotion in his voice gave Eliza pause, not because she believed his justifications, but because she recognized the genuine pain underlying them. It didn't excuse his actions, but it provided a context she hadn't fully considered. So your solution was to find someone who could hear you clearly? She asked, her tone softer but no less direct. Someone without the inconvenience of a disability? Daniel deflated visibly. That's not fair. None of this is fair, Daniel. Not to me, not even to you. But it's the reality we're facing. Eliza moved to the window, looking out at the dark ocean. The papers in the blue folder, they're divorce papers, aren't they? A long silence followed before Daniel answered. Yes. Eliza nodded, absorbing the confirmation of what she already knew. And you've signed them? We both did. Tonight. The finality of it washed over her. Her marriage was over. Had been over, perhaps, long before she'd seen the evidence with her own eyes. So what happens now? She asked, turning back to face him. We finish this mockery of a vacation and then head home to announce to our friends that we're divorcing, that you're moving in with the neighbor, that the last 16 years of our lives have been reduced to signatures on legal documents and a charm bracelet with a camera pendant? Daniel winced at her stark assessment. I was thinking I'd get a hotel room for tonight. Give you space. Another hotel room? My, you're racking up quite a bill. Eliza, please, I'm trying to be respectful here. Respectful? She laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. Was it respectful? To take my hearing aid without my permission? To conduct your affair under my nose? To plan your escape while pretending to reconnect with me? Daniel had no answer for that. You know what the saddest part of all this is? Eliza continued, her anger giving way to a deeper, more profound grief. It's not that you fell out of love with me. It's not even that you fell in love with someone else. It's that you thought so little of me, of my intelligence, of my perception, of my dignity, that you believed this elaborate deception was necessary. I was trying to protect you, Daniel said weakly. No, Eliza countered. You were trying to protect yourself. From the discomfort of an honest conversation. From the guilt of looking me in the eye and telling me you wanted out. From the responsibility of ending our marriage with integrity. Daniel stood silently, unable to refute her assessment. Eliza walked to her camera bag, which sat on a chair in the corner. From an inner pocket, she withdrew a small flash drive. All the photos I took tonight are on here, she said, placing it on the coffee table between them. The dinner, the gifts, the documents, everything. I won't be using them. I have no interest in a messy public divorce, but I want you to have them as a reminder of the choice you made and how you made it. Daniel stared at the flash drive as if it might bite him. What are you going to do? Tonight? I'm going to pack my things and check into a hotel, a different one than yours or Melissa's, I assure you. Tomorrow, I'm going to drive back home. Alone. And then I'm going to rebuild my life without you. Just like that? Daniel asked, his voice small. No, not just like that. Nothing about this will be easy or simple. But I refuse to stay in a marriage with someone who exploited my disability to cheat on me. Someone who planned his exit strategy with the precision of a military operation while pretending everything was fine. Eliza moved to the bedroom, Daniel following uncertainly in her wake. She pulled her suitcase from the closet and began methodically packing her belongings. I'm sorry, Daniel said from the doorway, watching her. For what it's worth, I never wanted to hurt you. Eliza paused, holding a sweater in her hands. But you did hurt me, Daniel. Not by falling out of love with me, or even by falling in love with Melissa. You hurt me by denying me the dignity of truth. By using my hearing loss as a tool in your deception. By assuming that because I couldn't hear everything, I couldn't see anything. She placed the sweater in her suitcase and turned to face him fully. That's a betrayal that goes beyond infidelity. It strikes at the core of who I am and how I fought to live my life despite my condition. Daniel nodded, his eyes downcast. I know, and I'll have to live with that. Yes, Eliza agreed, returning to her packing. You will. The silence between them stretched taut as Eliza continued to pack her belongings. When she was done, she zipped. The suitcase closed with a finality that seemed to echo in the room. I'll be back tomorrow to get the rest of my things, she said, lifting the suitcase off the bed. I'd appreciate it if you and Melissa weren't here when I come. Daniel stepped aside as she moved past him. Where will you go? He asked, following her to the living room. Eliza picked up her camera bag and purse, slinging them over her shoulder. Tonight, a hotel? After that? She shrugged. I hear the West Coast has some beautiful landscapes to photograph. Maybe I'll start there. At the door, she paused, turning back to face the man she had loved for 16 years. The man she had trusted with her heart, her future, her vulnerability. I hope she's worth it, Daniel. I hope she's worth everything you're throwing away. Without waiting for his response, Eliza walked out of the beach house, closing the door firmly behind her. 6 months later, the gallery was crowded, buzzing with the particular energy that accompanied successful exhibition openings. Eliza moved through the space with practiced ease, pausing to chat with art collectors and fellow photographers, accepting congratulations with a genuine smile. Her new collection, Silent Revelations, had garnered significant attention in the photography world. The series explored the visual intricacies that often went unnoticed in everyday life. The play of shadow and light on ordinary objects, the subtle expressions that flitted across faces in unguarded moments, the hidden stories told through posture and proximity. Critics had praised the collection for its extraordinary visual acuity and profound emotional intelligence. What none of them knew, what Eliza had never publicly disclosed, was that the genesis of the collection had been the night she'd photographed her husband's betrayal from a cliff overlooking the Lighthouse restaurant. That night had taught her just how much she could see when she truly looked, how much information was conveyed without sound, how the world was full of visual stories if you knew how to read them. Ms. Morgan? A young woman approached, her expression slightly odd. I'm Sophie Chen from Artscope magazine. I was wondering if I might ask you a few questions about your collection. Eliza nodded, gesturing to a quiet corner of the gallery where they could talk. She adjusted her new hearing aid, a more sophisticated model that, combined with her improved lip-reading skills, allowed her to navigate social situations with greater ease than before. Your work has taken a remarkable turn with this collection, Sophie observed once they were seated. There's an intimacy to these images that wasn't present in your previous landscape work. What inspired the shift? Eliza considered the question carefully. Life experiences, she said finally. I've always believed that great art comes from personal transformation. Sometimes that transformation is gradual, evolutionary. Other times it's sudden, seismic. And yours? Somewhere in between, Eliza smiled enigmatically. Let's just say I learned to see things differently. Sophie nodded, scribbling in her notebook. Several critics have noted that despite the visual nature of photography, your work seems to capture the absence of sound, to make visible what is inaudible. Is that intentional given your own experience with hearing loss? It was a perceptive question, one that cut closer to the truth than the young journalist could know. Perhaps, Eliza acknowledged. My hearing loss has certainly shaped how I experience and interpret the world. When one sense diminishes, others often compensate. For me, that meant developing a heightened visual awareness. A silver lining to a difficult situation? I prefer to think of it as adaptation rather than compensation, Eliza replied. We all work with what we have. The challenge is to transform limitations into possibilities. As Sophie continued with her questions, Eliza's attention was momentarily caught by a familiar figure entering the gallery. Daniel. She hadn't seen him since the divorce had been finalized 4 months ago. He looked older somehow, the lines around his eyes more pronounced. He was alone, no Melissa in sight. Sophie followed Eliza's gaze. Someone you know? My ex-husband, Eliza said simply. We haven't seen each other in months. Would you prefer to cut our interview short? Sophie offered, clearly sensing the potential awkwardness of the situation. Eliza considered this for a moment, then shook her head. No, we can continue. As they resumed their conversation, Eliza watched from the corner of her eye as Daniel moved through the gallery, studying her photographs with evident concentration. When he reached the centerpiece of the collection, a large-format image titled Revelation, he stopped, standing motionless before it. The photograph showed a woman standing on a balcony at dusk, her back to the camera, looking through a window at 2 indistinct figures inside a warmly lit room. The composition emphasized the woman's solitude, the glass barrier between her and the scene within, the fading light that cast everything in shades of blue and gray. It was beautiful and melancholy, intimate yet distant. What no one knew, what only Eliza and possibly Daniel could recognize, was that the balcony was the one at their beach rental. The indistinct figures were representations of Daniel and Melissa. The moment captured was the exact instant when Eliza had realized the full extent of her husband's betrayal. She had transformed her pain into art, her betrayal into beauty. Not to conceal or deny what had happened, but to reclaim it, to own it, to find meaning in it. One final question, Sophie said, bringing Eliza's attention back to the interview. Your artist statement mentions that this collection is about finding clarity in silence. Could you elaborate on what that means to you? Eliza smiled, the question providing a perfect segue to conclude their conversation. Silence isn't the absence of meaning. It's often where the deepest truths reside. In the quiet spaces between words, in the pauses between actions, in the stillness that follows upheaval, that's where we often find what matters most. Sophie nodded, clearly impressed with the response. Thank you for your time, Ms. Morgan, and congratulations again on a remarkable collection. As the journalist departed, Eliza's gaze returned to Daniel, who was still standing before Revelation, his posture suggesting a man grappling with uncomfortable recognition. After a moment's hesitation, she crossed the gallery to join him. Hello, Daniel. He turned, startled by her voice. Eliza, I wasn't sure if I should come. Yet here you are. He nodded, glancing back at the photograph. Your work is extraordinary. This whole collection, it's powerful. Thank you. An awkward silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken words and lingering regrets. How have you been? Daniel finally asked, his voice hesitant. Good, Eliza replied, surprised to find she meant it. Busy with the exhibition. Planning a trip to Norway next month to photograph the fjords. That sounds wonderful. You always wanted to go there. I did. Eliza studied his face, noting the subtle signs of strain around his eyes and mouth. And you? How are things with Melissa? Daniel's gaze dropped to the floor. We're not together anymore. It ended about 2 months ago. Eliza absorbed this information without the satisfaction she might once have expected to feel. I'm sorry to hear that. Are you? He looked up, searching her face for signs of insincerity. Yes, she said truthfully. I wouldn't wish unhappiness on anyone, not even you two. Daniel nodded, accepting this. She wasn't, he began, then stopped himself. It doesn't matter. It's over. It matters, Eliza said gently. Just not to me, not anymore. He winced slightly at that, but nodded again. That's fair. They stood side by side, looking at the photograph that silently chronicled the end of their marriage. This one, Daniel said eventually, gesturing to Revelation. It's about that night, isn't it? At the beach house? Yes, I recognized it immediately. The balcony. The angle. He shook his head slowly. It's strange to see it transformed like this. Made into something beautiful. Art often comes from pain, Eliza observed. From loss. From change. Is that what I was to you? Pain that needed transformation? The question was sharp, defensive, but Eliza recognized the genuine hurt beneath it. No, Daniel. You were 16 years of my life. Good years, mostly. What you did at the end, that caused pain. But you yourself were not pain to me. Her honest answer seemed to affect him deeply. He blinked rapidly, looking away. I've thought a lot about what you said that night. About dignity and respect. About how I used your hearing loss against you. He turned back to face her. You were right. It was unforgivable. I've forgiven you, Eliza said, surprising both of them with the realization. Not because what you did was excusable, but because holding on to that anger wasn't serving me. It was keeping me tethered to the past. Just like that? Daniel echoed her words from that night at the beach house. Eliza smiled faintly at the callback. No, not just like that. It took time, therapy, a lot of long walks on empty beaches. But eventually, yes, I let it go, Daniel nodded, accepting this. I'm glad. And I'm glad to see you thriving. This exhibition, it's a triumph. Thank you. Another silence fell between them, but this one was different, lighter, less burdened by unspoken recriminations. I should let you get back to your guests, Daniel said finally. I just wanted to see the show, and to see that you were okay. I am, Eliza confirmed. Better than okay, actually. As if to underscore her point, a gallery assistant approached them, apologetic for the interruption. Ms. Morgan, the director of the Whitney, is here. She'd like to discuss the possibility of bringing your collection to New York. Eliza nodded to the assistant. I'll be right there. Turning back to Daniel, she extended her hand. Goodbye, Daniel. He took her hand, holding it for a brief moment. Goodbye, Eliza, and congratulations, truly. You deserve all of this success. As Eliza walked away to meet the Whitney director, she felt a weight lifting from her shoulders, the final remnant of bitterness she hadn't realized she was still carrying. Later that evening, as the last of the guests departed and the gallery staff began the process of closing up, Eliza found herself alone with her photographs. She moved through the space slowly, seeing each image with fresh eyes after the emotional encounter with Daniel. When she reached Revelation, she paused, studying the composition she knew by heart. The solitary figure on the balcony, herself, was small against the vastness of the darkening sky, yet there was strength in her silhouette, a quiet dignity in her isolation. Eliza thought about the path that had led her here, from the devastating discovery at the beach house to this moment of professional triumph. She thought about the lessons she'd learned along the way, about resilience, about perception, about transforming pain into purpose. Daniel had taken her hearing aid that day, thinking he was removing her ability to perceive his betrayal. What he hadn't understood, what Eliza herself hadn't fully grasped until that moment, was that her hearing loss hadn't diminished her. It had enhanced her in ways neither of them had recognized. She reached out, gently touching the frame of the photograph, this tangible evidence of her transformation. In the silence of the empty gallery, surrounded by images born from both loss and discovery, Eliza Morgan smiled. The world around her might never be as loud as it once was, but it had never been more clear.
And that wraps up today's story. Now we want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and let's see how far these stories reach. If this story moved you or gave you chills, give it a like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. One last thing, rate the story from 1 to 10 in the comments. Your feedback helps us bring you even better ones next time. Thanks for watching. We appreciate you being part of this storytelling journey.